When I first pulled into the gravel lot of Harold's gas and convenience store, it was with a mix of desperation and hope. Studying to be a veterinary assistant was my dream. But dreams don't pay the bills, and this remote gas station job seemed like my best chance to earn some money while hitting the books. The setting sun cast long shadows over the rundown building, making it look even more forlorn against the backdrop of the dense forest that bordered the property. As I stepped out of my old pickup truck, the first thing that hit me was the silence. Apart from a soft cawing that seemed to echo from the trees, I found myself scanning the area, half expecting something to jump out at me. Instead, I was greeted by Harold Baxter, the owner, who emerged from the dimly lit store. "You must be Ellis," he said, his voice gruff but welcoming. Harold was a tall man, with a beard as gray as the fading light and eyes that seemed to miss nothing. We shook hands, and he quickly began the tour, introducing me to every corner of the tiny store and the equally small gas station premises. His steps were measured, and he pointed out various spots with a casualness that belied their oddity. "You'll get the hang of things pretty quickly," he assured me, though his tone suggested there was more to this job than met the eye. Then there were the pets. Pepper, the large black and white crow, and Captain, a sturdy black and gray German shepherd. Harold introduced them with a fond chuckle. "They're part of the security system here," he joked, but the crow's keen eyes and the dog's alert stance suggested they were more than mere pets. Pepper watched me with an intelligence that was unsettling, while Captain sniffed me over as if deciding whether I was friend or foe. As night began to fall, Harold laid out the rules. "There are a few things you need to know to work the night shift," he began, pulling out a well-worn notebook filled with what I would soon learn were not just suggestions but crucial guidelines for safety. He flipped through the pages, showing me notes and scribbles that mentioned specific colors and actions. "Red, especially, is a color you'll need to watch out for," he warned, tapping a rule that read, "Never chase the red lights into the woods." The peculiarity of the rules made me raise an eyebrow, but Harold didn't elaborate much. "You'll understand soon enough. It's for your safety and that of our customers," he said, his voice dropping to a serious tone that made me shiver slightly. It was clear that whatever these rules protected us from, Harold believed in them wholeheartedly. As he handed me the keys to the station, our transaction completed under the flickering light of a lone bulb outside the store, Harold looked at me with a sternness that bordered on concern. "Keep your wits about you, Ellis. It's not just animals and cars you'll be looking after here." Lying in bed later that night in the small room Harold had set up for me above the store, I couldn't shake the feeling of unease. The job was straightforward enough, or so it seemed. But the notebook lay on my bedside table, its contents a bizarre mix of everyday tasks and cryptic warnings. I drifted off to sleep with a resolve to stick it out, driven by necessity. Yet part of me remained alert, half expecting the cry of the crow or the howl of the dog to pull me from my dreams into the unknown mysteries of Harold's gas and convenience store. My first night shift at Harold's gas and convenience store started with the sky ink black and the forest sounds amplified, making the isolation of the station feel all the more real. I was alone, with only the company of Pepper and Captain. The crow perched on the roof, its eyes like shiny pebbles in the dark, and the dog lay by the front door, ears perked at every rustle and whisper of the wind. The store was quiet, too quiet, and I found myself jumping at the slightest sound. I spent the early part of the evening thumbing through the notebook Harold had given me. Its pages were filled with handwritten notes and warnings about specific situations and colors. "Red is danger," one note said, and another warned, "Never ignore Pepper's calls." I chuckled nervously, still skeptical of the idea that a bird and a dog could be part of some supernatural warning system. Around midnight, a woman in a red jacket drove up to the pump. My heart skipped a beat as I remembered Harold's warning about red. She was friendly, making small talk as I pumped gas, but there was something off about her. She kept glancing nervously towards the forest. After she left, Pepper cawed loudly, a sound that sent shivers down my spine. I couldn't help but wonder if there was a connection between her visit and the crow's reaction. The rest of the night was a blur of checking inventory and keeping an eye on the cameras, my nerves on edge. Every customer that came in seemed to carry a sense of urgency, as if they were aware of something I wasn't. I found myself watching Captain and Pepper for cues, slowly starting to trust their reactions as part of the station's unusual defense system. I began to notice more nuances in Pepper's and Captain's behaviors. Pepper would caw in a specific tone and rhythm that seemed to correspond to different types of visitors. Captain, on the other hand, seemed particularly alert whenever someone in dark clothing arrived, staying close to my side until they left. I realized there was a pattern to their behaviors, a sort of coded language that Harold understood and I needed to learn. One particularly foggy night, as the mist swirled like ghosts around the gas pumps, a man arrived in a hooded cloak, his face obscured. Captain growled low in his throat, a sound I had not heard him make before. Following the dog's lead, I was cautious, speaking to the man through the window as he requested directions to the nearest motel. His departure was as silent and eerie as his arrival, and both animals relaxed once he was gone. After that incident, I started taking the notebook's rules more seriously, realizing they were not just Harold's eccentricities, but possibly something that had kept him safe all these years. I decided to discuss these rules with Harold the next day, seeking more clarity on how they connected to the reality of what happened at the station. Harold listened intently as I recounted my experiences, nodding along. "You're getting the hang of it," he said, a note of approval in his voice. As the weeks turned into months, my initial skepticism about the supernatural aspects of Harold's gas and convenience store began to wear thin. The things I'd seen and experienced during my shifts were becoming harder and harder to dismiss as mere coincidences or tricks of the light. Each shift brought with it a new lesson, and I was learning to navigate this strange new world with a mix of curiosity and caution. Harold took on the role of mentor quite seriously. During our downtime, he would share tales of past encounters that sounded more like ghost stories than anything else. These sessions usually took place in the small, cluttered office at the back of the store, where the walls were lined with old newspaper clippings and photographs of the store through the years. "Every person who works here leaves a bit wiser," he'd say, a hint of pride in his voice. One afternoon, Harold decided it was time for more formal training. He laid out the notebook on the counter, its pages more worn than ever. "It's not just about following the rules," he explained. "It's about understanding why they're in place." He pointed to a rule about never letting the gas pumps run unattended at night. "It's not just for safety. It keeps them from coming too close." "Them?" I asked, the word heavy with implication. "The less you know, the safer you are, at least in the beginning," Harold replied cryptically. His reluctance to elaborate was frustrating, but I knew better than to press him. The mystery of his answers only deepened my resolve to understand the true nature of our work. One night, that opportunity came sooner than expected. I was alone, refilling the coolers when Pepper began cawing incessantly. I rushed outside, following the direction of his gaze, and found nothing but the rustling trees. Remembering Harold's teachings, I scanned the area, noticing a slight, unnatural fog rolling in from the woods. I hurried back inside, locking the doors and watching as the fog seemed to hesitate at the boundary of the light cast by the store's exterior lamps. This incident was a turning point for me. It was no longer possible to deny the reality of the supernatural elements surrounding the gas station. I found myself poring over the notebook with renewed interest, each rule now a vital clue in keeping myself and our customers safe. Harold seemed pleased with my progress. "You're starting to see it, aren't you? The balance we maintain here is delicate," he noted during one of our review sessions. He began to trust me more, sometimes leaving me to handle the night shifts on my own while he took care of errands or rested. It was during one such shift that I faced my first real test. A sudden, sharp howl split the night, and Captain bolted upright, his ears twitching in alert. Following the dog's lead, I grabbed a flashlight and stepped cautiously outside. There, in the edge of the woods, I saw the glowing eyes of something I could only describe as otherworldly. Heart pounding, I remembered Harold's instructions. Stand your ground, but never challenge them directly. Show respect, and they'll often return it. I held my position, keeping the flashlight steady. After what felt like hours but were only seconds, the creature, a shadowy form with those piercing eyes, retreated into the darkness. Returning inside, I was shaking but unharmed. Captain nudged his head against my leg, as if to reassure me. I realized then that I had crossed a threshold. There was no going back to the ignorance I had once cherished. From that moment on, I was fully committed to my role at the station, armed with knowledge and a growing sense of responsibility. The days had grown shorter and the nights longer, as if even the sun was wary of lingering around Harold's gas and convenience store. It was during one such extended dusk that Pepper began to show signs of distress that I hadn't seen before. The crow's caws were sharp and urgent, a stark contrast to its usual watchful warbles. Harold noticed it too and gave me a grave look. "It's starting," he muttered under his breath. "What's starting?" I asked, but Harold was already busy gathering what looked like old, hand-carved wooden symbols from a locked drawer beneath the counter. He handed me one, instructing me to hang it above the door. "It wards off lesser spirits. We're going to need all the help we can get tonight," he explained briefly, his focus on securing every potential vulnerability around the station. As twilight deepened into a starless night, the atmosphere grew tense. Harold briefed me on what he called a supernatural storm, a phenomenon that seemed to occur with irregular but disturbing frequency around these parts. "It's not a storm you can see with your eyes, Ellis. It's felt, right here," he said, tapping his chest. Captain and Pepper were unusually close to us, as if understanding the seriousness of the situation. We double-checked the station's exterior lights, making sure they were all functioning. Harold had always insisted that darkness was a conduit for unwanted visitors. "Keep the lights on, and they'll think twice about approaching," he'd say. Tonight, every bulb flickered with what I hoped was resilience. The first real test of the night came unexpectedly. A group of hikers appeared, their headlights spotting through the trees as they approached the station. They were laughing, oblivious to the danger they were walking into. Harold and I rushed out to meet them, advising them to either take refuge in the store or head back to town immediately. "Trust me, you don't want to be out here tonight," Harold warned them, his tone brooking no argument. No sooner had the hikers agreed to stay put inside the store than the air around us began to charge with an unseen energy. The lights flickered ominously, and even the wind seemed to hold its breath. I glanced at Harold, who was watching the tree line with a grim expression. "It's close," he said. The climax of the night came in a rush. A cold breeze swept through the station, so intense it made the windows rattle. From the darkness, a form materialized, its presence more felt than seen. A shadow among shadows, eyes glinting with malice. Captain growled, his body tense and ready, while Pepper let out a series of sharp caws. Following the notebook's instructions, I found myself reciting words I barely understood, phrases meant to protect and repel. Harold stood by me, his voice joining mine in a chant that seemed to vibrate with power. The shadow hesitated then, as if repelled by an invisible force, receded back into the darkness. Breathing heavily, we watched as the normal night sound slowly returned, the oppressive feeling lifting like a fog at sunrise. Harold clapped a hand on my shoulder, his eyes weary but relieved. "You did well, Ellis. But remember, it's always the quiet before the storm that's the most deceiving." As we settled back into the routine of the station, checking on the hikers and reassuring them, I couldn't shake the feeling of having crossed yet another boundary into the unknown. Tonight was a victory, if it could be called that, but I knew it was just one of many battles we would face. With each encounter, I was learning, adapting, and preparing for whatever came next. The aftermath of our initial confrontation with the shadowy entity left a heavy silence hanging over Harold's gas and convenience store. I could feel the tension in the air, like a string pulled taut, ready to snap at the slightest provocation. Harold and I, along with Captain and Pepper, gathered inside the store, our eyes frequently darting toward the windows, half expecting the darkness to press against the glass with malevolent intent. Harold checked his old, battered watch and then gave me a nod. "It's not over yet, Ellis. That was just the first wave. These storms, they sometimes come in cycles. Stay sharp." His words were calm but carried a weight that filled the room with a sense of impending urgency. I found myself gripping the notebook tighter, my thumb tracing the edges of its worn pages. As we prepared for the second wave, Harold explained more about what we were up against. These entities, they're drawn to places like this. Gateways, if you will. The station sits on a sort of crossroads, not just in the physical sense, but spiritually too. He gestured broadly, encompassing the dark expanse outside. That's why the rules in that book are so important. They're not just superstitions, they're protections. Before long, the foreboding signs of the entity's return began to manifest. The lights flickered more aggressively this time, and a low hum filled the air, a sound that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere all at once. Captain barked sharply, his body tense, as he faced the door. Pepper's caws turned frantic, echoing through the store like a warning bell. The hikers we had sheltered were visibly unnerved, huddling together and watching our preparations with wide, fearful eyes. I reassured them as best I could, echoing Harold's instructions to stay inside and away from the windows. "We'll keep you safe," I promised, hoping my voice didn't betray my own fears. Then it came. A surge of cold so intense it frosted the windows in seconds, obscuring our view of the outside world. Through the haze, a form loomed large, more defined than before, its eyes glowing with a fierce, unnatural light. This time, it was closer, and the threat it posed felt far more personal. Remembering the notebook, I shouted the words of a chant that Harold had marked as particularly powerful. My voice was steady, fueled by the adrenaline that coursed through my veins. Harold joined in, his voice blending with mine, to create a resonant shield that I hoped was as strong as the book claimed. The creature paused, its form wavering as if buffeted by a strong wind. Then, with a screech that seemed to shake the very foundations of the store, it retreated. The temperature began to rise, and the frost on the windows melted away, revealing a clear, star-filled sky, as if the storm had never been. We all let out a collective breath, the relief palpable in the room. The hikers approached us, their expressions a mixture of gratitude and awe. "How did you do that?" one of them asked, his voice a mix of curiosity and fear. Harold smiled wryly. "Old family secrets," he said, though his eyes met mine with a look that said there would be plenty more to discuss when the dawn came. As the night drew to a close, I reflected on the events that had unfolded. The creature had tested us, and we had stood our ground, protected by ancient words and the unyielding will to keep the darkness at bay. I felt a newfound respect for the notebook and the seemingly arcane rules it contained. More than ever, I was committed to learning all I could from Harold, to understand the deeper secrets of the station, and to prepare for whatever else might come our way. As I finally settled into my cot for a few hours of restless sleep, I realized that my life had irrevocably changed. I was no longer just a night shift worker at a rural gas station. I was a guardian of a gateway that bridged the mundane with the mysterious. The dawn after the supernatural storm was one of the most serene mornings I had ever witnessed. The sun rose with a gentle glow that bathed Harold's gas and convenience store in a warm, comforting light, contrasting sharply with the darkness of the night before. As I stepped outside, the fresh air felt like a clean slate, the terror of the night's events washed away by the morning light. Harold was already outside, inspecting the perimeter of the store and the gas pumps. He moved slowly, his eyes scanning every inch of the ground, as if looking for signs of the night's intrusion. Captain and Pepper were at his side, their demeanor calm but attentive. It seemed even they sensed the change in the atmosphere. We held up pretty well, All things considered, Harold remarked as he noticed me joining him. His voice carried a tone of relief mixed with a hint of weariness. These events, they test us, Ellis. They test our resolve and our readiness. Last night, you proved you're more than capable of handling what this place throws at you. I nodded, feeling a mix of pride and responsibility. It was intense, Harold. I've never experienced anything like that before. How often does it happen? I asked, genuinely curious about the frequency of such supernatural occurrences. Not too often, thankfully, Harold replied, looking towards the horizon. But it's unpredictable. That's why we always have to be prepared. You never know when the balance will tip again. We spent the morning debriefing in more detail. Harold explained some of the history of the station, how it had always been a kind of beacon or marker that attracted both good and bad energies. It's built on a sort of fault line between our world and others. That's why the creatures come here, drawn by its energy. He explained, his eyes reflecting a deep knowledge of things unseen. As the day progressed, I found myself reflecting on my role in all of this. The decision to stay wasn't just about needing a job anymore. It was about accepting a duty to stand guard over this unusual gateway. The store and the gas station were more than just a workplace. They were a front line of sorts, a barrier against the chaos that lurked just beyond our normal understanding. By midday, Harold and I were inside the store, restocking shelves and cleaning up. The mundane tasks felt grounding after the night's supernatural drama. It's these simple routines that keep us sane, Ellis, Harold commented as he arranged cans on a shelf. They anchor us to reality. Our conversation turned to plans for increasing our defenses against future threats. Harold pulled out maps and old books filled with lore and diagrams. We'll set up more symbols around the perimeter, maybe even get some salt lines. Whatever extra protection we can muster, he planned out loud, his mind clearly racing through options. As the sun set, marking the end of a long day, I felt a deep sense of camaraderie with Harold. This strange, frightening journey had bonded us, and I knew I had found a mentor and a friend. I also realized how much I had changed since that first day I drove into the gas station's lot. The naive skepticism was gone, replaced by a resolute determination to learn and to protect. That night, as I lay in bed, the events of the past weeks replayed in my mind. I was no longer just a bystander in my own life story. I was an active participant in a narrative much larger and more complex than I had ever imagined. I drifted off to sleep, not with fear, but with a resolve to face whatever came next with courage and a clear mind. The station, Harold, Captain, and Pepper had become my new world, and I was ready to defend it. As the weeks turned into months, my life at Harold's gas and convenience store settled into a new kind of normalcy. I had fully embraced my role, not just as a night shift worker, but as a guardian of this peculiar gateway between worlds. Each shift brought with it a sense of purpose, a realization that what we did here was important, not just for our own safety, but for the safety of others who might unwittingly stumble into these supernatural crossroads. One quiet evening, as I was restocking shelves, Harold joined me with Pepper perched on his shoulder. He watched as I organized the items with meticulous care, a habit I had picked up from him. "You've really taken to this, haven't you?" he asked, a small smile playing on his lips. "Yes, I guess I have," I replied, pausing to straighten a row of canned goods. "It feels right, like I'm where I'm supposed to be." The words surprised me a bit as they came out, but they were true. The store, with all its quirks and dangers, had become a home to me. Harold nodded, understandingly. "It's not an easy life, but it has its rewards," he said, his gaze drifting towards the window, where the last light of day was fading into twilight. "And having good company makes it all the more bearable." The relationship between Pepper, Captain, and me had grown significantly. I learned to read their signals and behaviors, understanding their warnings and knowing when to be on high alert. Captain had become particularly protective, often staying close by my side during my rounds. Pepper, on the other hand, seemed to enjoy our silent companionship, occasionally flying in to sit near me as I worked. Our defenses had also been bolstered. Following Harold's plans, we had set up additional protective symbols around the perimeter and laid down lines of salt at strategic points. I had read about such practices in folklore and horror stories, but implementing them felt surprisingly natural, another part of the job. Moreover, I began to document our experiences and the lessons learned in a new notebook, adding to the legacy Harold had started. This journal was not just a set of rules but a guide, filled with both practical advice and insights into the supernatural phenomena we encountered. It felt important to preserve this knowledge, perhaps for future guardians of the gas station. One particularly rewarding aspect of my role was educating the occasional curious hiker or lost traveler who sensed something unusual about the place. I found a way to offer explanations without revealing too much, maintaining the delicate balance between knowledge and safety. Just some local folklore, I'd often say, with a knowing look that suggested more to the story. I continued my education to become a veterinary assistant. I found parallels between my studies and my work at the station. Both required patience, a steady nerve, and an open mind. The lessons I learned at Harold's helped me in unexpected ways, giving me insights into animal behavior and the balance of nature. Finally, as I settled into bed after a long night with the soft sounds of Captain's breathing and Pepper's occasional rustles filling the small room above the store, I felt a profound sense of contentment. This unusual life, with its blend of the mundane and the mystical, had become my own. I was no longer just a witness to the strange happenings at Harold's gas and convenience store. I was an integral part of its story, ready to face whatever mysteries and challenges lay ahead.